Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here today to continue reading Indian No More by Charlene Willing McManis with Traci Sorell. This book is published by Lee and Low Books, and we have talked about last time that Charlene Willing McManis was a member of the Umpqua tribes in as part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and Traci Sorell is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. We also want to acknowledge that the Portland Public Library is on land that belonged to the tribes of the Wabanaki Confederacy, and that land was stolen from those tribes, which still exist today in parts of Maine. We're going to continue where we left off with Chapter 6, Courtesy of the Government. Our family arrived in Los Angeles on July 9th, 1957. The train station was huge compared to the tiny one that we had left in Salem. Rows upon rows of polished wooden benches lined up the floor. A gigantic clock hung high above the front door. Speakers blasted times and places. People rushed by, whipping around us. Some people even pushed us aside. No one spoke to us or seemed to notice that we were there. "Time to track down this Indian agent," Daddy said, wiping the sweat from his brow and hooking his black jacket over his arm. "He should have been here to meet us." We walked out of the station into the dry, hot air. This didn't feel like home at all. Daddy set our big suitcase and Chich's sewing machine down on the curb. He pulled a piece of paper from his wallet. A white man wearing a tie and a short-sleeved shirt hurried towards him. "Are you the Petite family?" "Yes, we've been waiting for you," Daddy replied. "I apologize. I'm Steve Parsons with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Park right over here." He carried the smaller of our two suitcases and Chish's sewing machine to his car while Daddy lugged the bigger suitcase. After Mr. Parsons set our things by the trunk and opened the passenger side back door, Mama, Chich, Pee-wee, and I climbed into the back seat. Daddy loaded our bags in and slid into the front seat next to the agent. As we headed away from the station, Pee-wee and I craned our necks to see out of the front and side windows. "What's that?" I asked, when what looked like a large metal box slid to a stop ahead of us. "It's a streetcar. It's like a little train in the city that moves people around," Mr. Parson replied. "Wow, a streetcar, so many buildings, so many people. Everywhere I looked was filled with something or someone." Soon we moved out of taller buildings to an area with diners and shops and little houses. "Hey, how would we stop at that Chinese restaurant I see up there on the right? Grab some dinner to go. You girls have to try it. I haven't had any since I was in the Navy," said Daddy. We waited in the car while Daddy and Mr. Parsons went in and ordered our dinner. I didn't know what kind of food came from a Chinese restaurant, but really nothing I had seen here had looked familiar. I crinkled up my nose when they returned. Chinese food didn't smell like venison stew. When we pulled up in front of the house on 58th Place, no one said anything. Mr. Parsons helped Daddy with our suitcases as we scooted out of the back seat. Our old wooden farmhouse had plenty of land to live, play, and explore. But this little stucco box, well, it rested on 6 feet of front yard, 8 feet of backyard, and a yardstick of dirt between the houses. "These houses are so close together you can taste your neighbor's pot roast from your window," Mama said as we walked up the porch steps to the front door. I stared at the surroundings. Busy asphalt streets replaced isolated dirt roads. Concrete replaced grass. In fact, there was a concrete path that stretched from our concrete porch to the concrete sidewalk. "Not many plants to speak of," Chich said. Mr. Parsons didn't offer to show us around. He just gave Daddy the keys and then had him sign some papers on the car hood. He handed Daddy a catalog with some classes Daddy would need to enroll in for the next month. Then Mr. Parsons wished us luck and drove off. Inside, the house was furnished courtesy of the government, and it wasn't much better. Pee-wee sat on the faded couch. I walked into the kitchen with Mama to inspect a greasy gas stove and a refrigerator that smelled like sour milk. Chit sat down on one of the rusty mint green chairs that matched the metal kitchen table. "Hey, there's a washing machine in here," Daddy said as he glanced into the small room just past the kitchen. He put out our suitcases in our room, and Pee-wee and I explored the rest of the house. There were 2 twin beds in one bedroom, and one bigger bed in the other with a bathroom in between. Daddy plopped down the sacks full of white paper cartons from the Chinese restaurant. Sweet and sour shrimp, chow mein, egg rolls, fried and white rice, and 5 cans of pop covered the table. "Not crazy about chow mein tonight, girls?" Dad asked as Pee-wee and I looked at the food we'd never seen before. We decided to try some white rice and a piece of shrimp without the sauce. "Come on, Kate, isn't this great? Like we have a gas stove now instead of an old wood stove." Mama wouldn't respond. Daddy tried again to be positive. "Trust me," he said, taking her hand. "It will all work out. Next month I'll be in electronics school and I'll have a great job by December." Mama jumped out of her chair. "You think this is great? We left our home to live in this dump." Her lips quivered. Tears formed in her eyes. "Don't cry, Mama," Pee-wee said. "It's not that bad." Mama sat back down and touched Pee-wee's hair. Daddy stood up, folding his arms across his puffed-up chest and then stretching them out wide, smiling. "Coming here makes us Americans," he said, imitating Burt Lancaster in that Apache movie he and Cousin Harlan had seen when they worked up at that mill near Portland. "Soon we be white people, living in good house, working good job, getting good life." His gray eyes twinkled. "Indian no more." He pulled Mama to him. "Come on, woman, give me a smooch." Mama struggled hard not to smile. "John, stop it. The girls are here." Pee-wee and I laughed and immediately came to her rescue, tugging her away from Daddy's grip. Chich kept quiet as she cleared the table, cleaned off the dishes, and put them away in the cupboard. "I'm going to bed now," she said. "Good night." That night, sharing one of the twin beds with Pee-wee, I listened to the sounds in our new home. I heard every car that drove by, every breath from Mama and Daddy in the next room, but Chich's muffled sobs from the other twin bed made my eyes wet. I prayed to the Sahali Tahi that Daddy would take us home, that he would come to his senses, as Chich said, and see we didn't belong here. But that did not happen. Chapter 7, Meeting the Neighbors. Even though that tiny stucco house wasn't anything like our res home, it did have one feature that I loved. From the living room, I could race to our bedroom, into the bathroom, over Mama and Daddy's bed, and then through the kitchen and back out into the living room. One giant circle. Trust me, I couldn't do that in the old farmhouse. Pee-wee and I kept chasing each other around and around until Chit stretched her arm out. "You two sound like a pair of wild raccoons," she said, propping up the broom against our bedroom wall. "Go play outside. It's beautiful this morning." She grabbed 2 cattail dolls that she had made before leaving Grand Ronde and held them out to us. Pee-wee and I took the dolls and ran out to the front yard. There we scavenged for sticks and leaves to make lean-tos, the summer houses some Indians make when they're away from home fishing, hunting, and gathering. Back on the res, Daddy taught us how to make them one Saturday afternoon while Mama waited tables at the diner and Chich visited Aunt Rosie. As we constructed our lean-tos, the sun blazed above. The traffic noise from Western Avenue rumbled over to our street. I glanced up, checking out the neighborhood. That's when I noticed a boy on the sidewalk staring at Pee-wee and me. His white t-shirt and tan shorts accented his skinny black frame. He said nothing, just stared. Standing next to him was his younger sister, I assumed, with 4 ponytail braids, all hugged closed at the end with different colored barrettes. I was startled at first, wondering why they didn't say hello or something to let us know they were there. As I stood and dusted the dried grass from my knees, the girl blurted out, "Are you Indians? Our parents said that Indians were moving in." "Yeah," I said slowly as I studied these new kids. They didn't look like any of the kids back in Grand Ronde. Never seen anyone so dark. "We're Umpqua. What are you?" The boy looked around as if I had sprouted antlers. "We're colored," the boy answered. Now I was really confused. "What do you mean?" We're black," the girl added. I had never heard of that. "Okay, well, what tribe is that?" The boy's mouth opened up, and he burst out laughing like I had asked a dumb question. The girl giggled so hard she snorted. "We're not from an Indian tribe. I don't think there's any tribes in Arkansas where we moved from, just white folks that don't want us around. Haven't you ever met black people before?" "No," I huffed. "Nope, you're the first ones ever," Pee-wee chimed in with a smile, holding out our dolls. "Want to play?" That Pee-wee. She made friends everywhere. "Is this a real Indian doll?" the girl asked, checking out Pee-wee's cat-tail doll. Our Chich made it, so I guess it is, Pee-wee grinned. Chich? The boy said. That's how we say grandmother, I said. The girl studied the doll. Then she squatted down to check out our lean-tos. She looked puzzled by the mass of tiny leaves, flowers, and twigs. Is this how you live back where you came from? No, Pee-wee replied. We had a house back home. This is a lean-to. I whispered to the boy. Does she always ask so many questions? Yep, Nosie's what we call her at home. The girl jumped up from the grass and bolted up the porch steps. My name's Addie Bates, and he's Keith, she declared. Can we see your house? Pee-wee and I gave each other a sidelong glance. Sure, Pee-wee said. I'm Teresa, but everyone calls me Pee-wee, and she's Regina. Where are your Indian blankets? Addie asked as Keith and I entered the house behind them. And how come your couch has stains? I cringed. I hadn't thought about how bad the couch looked. Chich crochets all our blankets, Pee-wee said, and the government gave us this couch. The government gave you a couch? Addie asked. Yeah, I said. They gave us all this furniture. Well, except for Chich's sewing machine. We brought that from the res. The res? Our Indian reservation, I replied. What's that? It's land where Indians live, work, and go to school. Ours is in Oregon, I said, wondering if I was lying because it didn't exist anymore after being terminated. And you guys know how to sew? Addie continued. Addie, Keith said, pulling on the back of his sister's blouse. Shut up. Addie scrunched up her face. Ooh, you told me to shut up. I'm going to tell Mama. We continued the tour and entered the kitchen. Mama was scrubbing out the refrigerator, stopping only long enough to take a drag from her cigarette. She acknowledged us with a nod, and the scent of vinegar filled the air. From the kitchen, we headed out back. Chich was there, supervising Daddy putting up the clothesline. He stretched out the rope from the back porch to the small garage as tight as he could. Chich, this is Keith and Addie, I said. Chich smiled at them, and Daddy walked over to us. His large frame towered over our new friends. They stepped back to give him room. Does this work for you, Ma? Daddy asked Chich, pointing to the clothesline. It'll do, she said, nodding. She turned to us. How about I make some sandwiches for you all? Without waiting for an answer, she headed inside. Daddy surveyed Keith and Addie and smiled. You live close by? Yes, sir, Keith said. We live down the street and 2 houses down from you. Nice to meet you. Why don't you kids head inside for those sandwiches? Daddy started putting his tools away. We raced back inside. While we nibbled on peanut butter sandwiches at the kitchen table, Mama went to arrange stuff in the bathroom. Addie told us all kinds of stories about the neighborhood and the kids on the street, kids we had yet to meet. Hanging out with Keith and Addie felt kind of like spending time with my cousins back home. So that's why I couldn't have guessed what was coming next. Chapter 8. The Wrong Kind of Indians. Addie ran home to get some pink plastic dolls and doll beds, and Keith brought back toy bows and arrows, decorated with brightly colored feathers and fake leather. Can you teach me how to shoot an arrow? Keith asked, handing me the bow. I don't know how to shoot, I said, and handed it back. Doesn't your daddy own a bow and arrows? My brow wrinkled. I don't think so. I looked over at Pee-wee sitting with Addie, who was going nonstop with the questions. What about an Indian costume? Addie asked her. Costume? No, why would I wear a costume? Pee-wee seemed perplexed. Frankly, I was too. Addie threw her hands in the air. Geez, what kind of Indians are you? Do you even have a teepee? I never thought about it. Teepees, Indian costumes. Heck, I never saw teepees or any of that stuff, except for in a couple of old cowboy comics at Cousin Harlan's house. I realized that unless we did something Indian, these new friends wouldn't believe that we were, and I wasn't about to let them think that. I bet Daddy knows how to make one. He can make anything. I raced inside the house and found Daddy relaxed on the couch, reading the Los Angeles Examiner. Keith and Addie are asking us to make a teepee. Do you know how to make one? Daddy furrowed his black eyebrows and put down his paper. What? He asked. I repeated the question. Umpqua don't have teepees, he said. Just make them a lean-to, like I taught you. But they don't want a lean-to. They want a teepee. That's what Indians make. Daddy laughed. Well, not an Umpqua Indian. You know that. He went back to reading his paper. I sighed. Meanwhile, Pee-wee poked her head in the door. She signaled me to follow her outside. He said that he would make one. A teepee? She nodded. He went home to get supplies. A little later, Keith showed up in the backyard with some rope, an old bed sheet, some long nails, and a hammer. He walked over to the young walnut tree that stood near our tall wooden fence. He studied the tree, and then he tied the top part of the sheet around the tree trunk with rope. "Where did you learn that?" I finally asked, watching how he knotted the rope in ways that I'd never seen before. "Boy Scouts," Keith said. From there, he stretched the sheet outward and nailed the edges to the ground. The entrance was one flap of the sheet that hung inside the teepee. "So what do you think?" I raised my eyebrows. "Well, it's much better than what I would have made." I didn't know what Boy Scouts were, but there was a lot I didn't know about life outside Grand Ronde. Pee-wee and I used that teepee with our friends all afternoon, and the day after that, and the day after that. More questions were asked in that teepee than I had ever heard before. Chapter 9, Plank House People. With all these questions and talk about real Indians, I knew who would have the answers. Chich. "How come our people don't make teepees?" I asked that night when we were getting ready for bed. I sat on Pee-wee and my's bed, taking down my braids so Chich could brush my hair as she did each night. "'Cause our people didn't move around like the Plains Indians," she said. "We built plank houses from woods, fished in the rivers, and cultivated camas and other crops." But Addie said that all Indians make teepees. "Oh, is that so?" Chich said, eyebrows raised. She tucked Pee-wee into her side of the bed and kissed her cheek. Then she sat on my side to brush my hair. I was deep in thought. Back home, we didn't have to prove we were Indian. Everyone on the res knew. Even the white people who lived there knew. No one ever showed up in headdresses or buckskins or carried around bows and arrows. But in the city, I guess, Indians had to show, not tell. Chich seemed to read my mind. Some people think that Indians still live like they did before the white man came. "Back when we had headdresses and bows and arrows," said Pee-wee. "No," Chich replied, gently working the knots out at the end of my hair. "How come you don't have an Indian costume?" I asked her. "Addie says we're not Indians unless we have costumes." "It seems Addie thinks she knows more about being Indians than we do," Chich said. She tucked me in, kissed my cheek, and sat on her bed. We listened. I remember my mama owning a traditional dress, but it wasn't a costume. It was beautiful. I asked her once why she didn't wear it anymore. She told me how when she was little, the Indian agent would gather our people in their deerskin regalia adorned with shells and parade them through town like circus acts. She didn't like the white folks' stares. Then onlookers from the town would follow our people back to the res expecting a show, and the Indian agent would have them perform for the crowd. They danced and sang and drummed while the Indian agent collected money for himself. Because of that, many stopped wearing their regalia. A person gets tired of being treated like a circus animal. Chich coughed a couple of times and pressed a hand to her chest. "Are you all right, Chich?" I jumped up and placed my hand on hers. "Do you need your pill?" The doctor back on the res had given Chich some pills for her heart, which didn't beat like it should. Seeing her hand on her heart like that made mine flutter too. "I'm fine, it's nothing, just my heart fluttering," she said. She smiled. "Now where was I?" "Our people danced with the town folk," Pee-wee said. "That's right. And with Chich let me tuck the covers around her. I don't think Addie and Keith will believe that we're real Indians unless we have something that shows we're Indians," I said. "Regina, just remember this. You were born an Indian. Pee-wee is an Indian. It's our Umpqua stories and traditions that keep you Indian. You don't need to dress up to prove that." Tish gave a tired smile and then turned over, facing the wall. I sighed. Knowing you were Indian was one thing. Proving it was quite another. Chapter 10. Bows, Arrows, and TV Indians. Pee-wee didn't mind Addie's constant questions or opinions about everything, but then again Pee-wee was more easygoing and loved to have lots of friends. Keith was quieter. With him I usually had to start the conversation. We sat outside, sipping Kool-Aid. After talking with Chich last night, I had some questions of my own. "Why do you think that my family should have things like teepees and costumes?" I asked. "Well, it's because what the Indians have. I saw it on TV," he said. "You guys live on a lot of land, hunt wild things, and have fun." "Yeah, it's fun living on the res. I can see Spirit Mountain and all kinds of trees, and my relatives' house is nearby. All of Daddy's cousins get together with their shotguns and hunt deer. And while they're gone, the women make breads and pies. They have us kids cut up the vegetables for the stew." The memory of our deer hunts made me sad for Grand Ronde. The hunters would ask for help providing food for their families and the community. When the men came home, the deer would be hung up and slaughtered. They took time to thank the deer for giving up their lives to protect us. After they processed the meat, the men would distribute portions throughout their families. The woman marinated the meat in spices and then fried it or placed it inside a big pot of stew. Sometimes it seemed like forever before the food was served, but when it was, everyone ate to their heart's content. Now none of that was going to happen on 58th place. No bows and arrows? Keith asked. I laughed. You can use bows and arrows, but my daddy and his cousins didn't. But in the movies, I smirked. How about your people? I asked Keith. Do they hunt? Keith's eyes widened. Are you kidding? We always lived in the cities. We buy our meat at the store. In fact, that's where we buy all our food. He paused. Do you even have grocery stores? Yes, you sure seem to think we live like those Indians you watch on TV. I watched Keith sip his Kool-Aid. He seemed to be deep in thought, like wanting to say something, but he didn't. So I asked him, what do your people look like on TV? Does it show how you lived long ago? Only if you watch Tarzan movies. We wear loincloths and carry spears and do a lot of mumbling. It seems like we're scared of every animal around. That sounds weird. I never saw any of those movies. Do people think that you're like that? I don't know, but whites and sometimes other folks do see us different. Different. That was how I was feeling since moving to LA. That's where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick up tomorrow with Chapter 11, Summer in the City. We've been reading Indian No More by Charlene Willing McManis with Traci Sorell. This book is published by Lee and Low Books. Once again, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.